Hello everyone, thank you for joining me for another Critter Spotlight. Today we're going to be talking about the Diamondback Terrapin. And Diamondback Terrapins are a bit of a celebrity in the state of Maryland. In 1994, they were named the Maryland State Official Reptile. And going back way before that, back in the 1920s and 30s, the University of Maryland has been using the terrapin as one of their symbols. In 1921, the University of Maryland named their college newspaper the Diamondback, after the Diamondback Terrapin. And in 1933, the University of Maryland named their official mascot and nickname the Terrapins also. So in the state of Maryland, the Diamondback Terrapin is a very important species. And why is that? One of the reasons is because they are native to our Chesapeake Bay. And one of the things that's really interesting about Diamondback Terrapins is they're thought to be the only turtle that is exclusively found in brackish water habitats. So most turtles that are this size tend to live in fresh water. They'll live in lakes and ponds and little outskirts off of saltier waters. And large turtles that live in saltwater habitats like sea turtles tend to live exclusively in salt water. But these turtles, when they're in their adult stage, tend to prefer salinity levels that are in between freshwater and saltwater. And the water that is found in the Chesapeake Bay in the state of Maryland is brackish. It is a mixture of salty and fresh water. Now, terrapins do have a very wide range. They are not found only in the state of Maryland. In fact, they have one of the largest ranges of all North American turtles. They can be found in brackish water all the way as far north as Cape Cod in Massachusetts, and as far south as the southern tip of Florida, and even into the Gulf waters touching Texas. So they have a very wide range, but they do live exclusively, for the most part, in that brackish water where it's in between salty and fresh. They can tolerate fresh water, and they can tolerate full-strength salt water also. They have a lot of adaptations that have led them to be able to tolerate salt water that a lot of their other turtle friends that live in freshwater typically can't tolerate. So their skin is very different. It is mostly impermeable to salt, and one of the special adaptations that they have is they have a special gland that allows them to excrete or get rid of excess salt in their body. So especially because they spend a lot of their time in salt water, sometimes they're going to be drinking that water. They can tell the difference between different salinities of water. So if they need water to drink, they can kind of go out searching for water that is fresher in nature. But if they are consuming food, for example, that's living in saltier areas, they actually do have a gland in their body that allows them to get rid of that salt so that it doesn't stay in their body, which can be toxic for them. So that's one special adaptation that they have. They also have developed behaviorally to be able to come up to the surface of the water, and especially after it has rained, when there's a thin surface layer of very fresh water from the rainfall, they'll swim right up along the surface and drink from that thin surface layer of fresh water. So that allows them to be able to get some fresh drinking water. Sometimes they actually will also even lift their head out of the water while it's raining and drink the rain that's falling directly from the sky. So that is a really cool behavioral adaptation that they have that allows them to live in these brackish water habitats. You can see they also have very big webbed feet. Terrapins spend most of their time in the water. Really the only time they come out of the water is to lay their eggs. Otherwise, their whole lives are spent in the water, and that is why they have these big webbed feet. They really help them be skilled swimmers. Since that's where they're going to spend most of their time, that's going to be a really important adaptation for them, is to have those nice big webbed feet. Allow them to push themselves through the water. You can tell their shell is also pretty flat, and that's another adaptation that swimming turtles tend to have. They don't want to have those big round shells like a box turtle has. Box turtles are mostly terrestrial, so they're found on land. They're not going to be in the water that often, so having a nice flat shell isn't going to be as important to them. But a terrapin that's going to spend most of its life in the water wants to have a nice flat streamlined shell. This Diamondback Terrapin that I have here with me is one of the terrapins that we have that lives at the Battle Creek Cypress Swamp Nature Center. And this terrapin is a male, and one of the ways that I can tell that is because his tail is long and it is very thick. So typically, and this goes for most turtle species, the males are going to have a much longer and thicker tail. Females' tails will be much shorter. And the male species also in Diamondback Terrapins are much smaller. So males on average tend to be about 5 inches long, whereas females tend to be on average about 8 inches long. So that's one of the ways that you can tell males and females apart from each other. They all have these diamond patterns on the back of their shell. That's where they get their name from. But their coloring can vary. It can be a very dark gray, greenish, brownish color. This one is much lighter in color. We do have another terrapin here at the Nature Center that is much darker than this one. So you really can kind of see that wide color range just between two different turtles that we have. But they all have these black markings on their skin that are unique to them, the same way that our fingerprints are unique to us. Typically, Diamondback Terrapins will mate in the late spring, and they will go ahead and lay their eggs on the sand dunes of the beaches of whatever habitat they tend to live in. And they will lay anywhere between 4 and 20 eggs at a time. They will dig a hole into the sand, lay their eggs, and then bury them. And then, like many reptiles, terrapin eggs tend to hatch based on the temperature surrounding them. So males tend to hatch if the temperature is cooler. Females tend to hatch as the temperature gets warmer. So sometimes that varies within the egg clutch. Sometimes the colder eggs at the bottom of the clutch will hatch as males, whereas the eggs towards the top of the clutch, which are being heated by the sun, will hatch as female, and sometimes they will all be one sex when they are hatched. After the eggs have been laid, it takes about 60 to 80 days for those eggs to hatch. And when the eggs hatch and the hatchlings come out, they're very, very tiny. And those hatchlings are not as well adapted to salt waters. So depending on where the eggs are laid, oftentimes terrapin hatchlings will actually spend their first winter living on land, and they'll be mostly terrestrial. And that's just because, again, they're not really adapted to living in saltier waters. They don't do as well in the salt water. So they have adapted, however, to be freeze tolerant. So they're actually able to overwinter on the land and cope with those freezing temperatures. And then after they've overwintered for a year, the following spring or summer, they will make their way into the salt waters or the brackish waters of their natural habitat. Now, even though I said earlier Terrapins have a very wide range all the way from Cape Cod to Florida. They do not migrate, so they don't move around a lot. Once they have their habitat, their area, they pretty much stay within a very small range. So they're not going to be traveling from Massachusetts to Florida throughout the year. They're definitely not a wide-ranging turtle individually. It's just as a species, they can be found in that wide range. But for the most part, once they come out of their eggs, once they are hatched, if they decide to spend that year on land, they will do that in that area where they have hatched, usually around those dunes, and then they will make their way right into the exact same water body that their parents likely are in also. As far as food goes, they will eat fish. They'll also eat snails and other little invertebrates that you can find in brackish water, like shrimp or clams or mussels. So a lot of scientists think that the reason why they tend to live exclusively in these brackish habitats are simply because the prey that they prefer to catch are living in those habitats as well. That oftentimes determines, in large part, where any animal lives. Whatever it likes to eat, it needs to go to that area where their food is, and that's where they're going to stay. So that's what scientists believe has led terrapins to be an exclusively brackish water turtle, because the food that this turtle likes to eat is going to be found in brackish water. So that's where they stay. Now, because terrapins are so important to us in the state of Maryland, we want to make sure that they're protected. Now, federally, they are only listed as a near threatened animal, so they're not an endangered species or anything, but state by state, they have different levels of regulation placed on them. In the state of Maryland, it was made illegal to catch and to sell terrapins for commercial use back in 2007. And that was really important because terrapins were actually a main source of food. They were one of the most prized catches in the commercial fishing industry for a very long time. Terrapin soup was very popular. It was considered a delicacy. It was very expensive to buy at restaurants, and because of that, they were really overfished almost to the point of a complete population decline. So those protections being placed on them, sorry buddy, back in 2007 has really helped to bring their numbers back up. However, there are a lot of things that are still hurting their numbers. Things like habitat encroachment. Obviously, these terrapins like to lay their eggs on the beaches, and they like to make their homes along the beaches, and that's where humans like to live also, and that's where humans like to spend a lot of time. So they're losing some of their habitat to that. Also, another really big problem that some people don't realize is that because crabbing is such a large industry in the state of Maryland also, and really up and down the East Coast, terrapins occasionally will go looking for food and they will find it in crab traps. And the problem is, if a terrapin gets itself caught in a crab trap, because it is a reptile, it needs to breathe air. It cannot breathe underwater. It doesn't have gills like crabs and fish do. So it can hold its breath. It will go under looking for food, grab the food from the crab trap, but if it can't get out of the crab trap, then it's not going to be able to breathe. And if it's stuck under there for long enough, it's going to drown. So they actually have come up with a device, and it is called a BRD, a bycatch reduction device. Now, bycatch is anything that you catch if you're out fishing that you didn't mean to catch. So if you're going out to catch crabs and you catch a terrapin, that's considered bycatch, something that you weren't intending to catch. So they have these devices called BRDs. They're also sometimes called TEDs, or turtle excluder devices. And what you can do is you can put these devices on your crab trap, and it prevents the terrapin from getting stuck in the crab trap. It actually prevents them from going all the way into the crab trap at all. So the opening on the BRD is big enough so that crabs can still get in, but terrapins cannot. So they're really, really important, and a lot of people that go crabbing don't realize they're actually required on all crab pots in the state of Maryland. So if you go out crabbing, make sure that you get yourself BRDs to put on your crab pots, not only because that's what the law says, but it's really important to help these terrapins out, because that's one of the things that's really been bringing their numbers down, is them getting caught inside these crab traps looking for food. That's all the information I have for you today. Thanks so much for joining me for this Critter Spotlight on our Maryland State reptile, the Diamondback Terrapin. See you next time.